It's hard to educate if A, people don't want to be educated, or B, it's hard to educate if we don't do a good job communicating. So everybody's in this together, so we need to have those conversations.
Hi, I'm Officer Knutson, and in this episode of the Perspective Project, I sat down with Lieutenant Almer again to talk about 8 Can't Wait. There's a lot to cover here, so I'll make this quick. If you're interested in a specific element of 8 Can't Wait, you can check the video description below, and we have a description and a time marker for each of the elements. So I hope you find this video helpful, and thanks for watching. 8 Can't Wait is a big thing. I've had close friends ask me about it. What do you think about this? Let's jump right into that.
I want to give a caveat real quick on the 8 Can't Wait, because a lot of people don't know the backstory. It was actually done in 2016. It's interesting because everyone wanted this task force report on the criminal justice system, especially the police. And so they present it. You can still Google it up and look. The results of that paper, that task force findings, surprised people. They said, okay, the criminal justice system itself has huge issues that needs to be repaired, and the police are actually not that part of it. They're actually doing what they can to do the right things. So it was interesting how quickly everyone clamored for that, and then it was dismissed. When people go, oh, 8 Can't Wait, a lot of people think it's a new thing that's come up just because of the current issues and things like that. It's not. It's actually kind of an older thing that folks are going, hey, we looked at these consistencies or inconsistencies amongst all these law enforcement agencies. Can we draw parallels as to who does what, and does that have a correlation with higher use of force deaths or lower use of force deaths? So they're looking for maybe modalities of causation and things like that. And that's what these 8 policies that we're going to talk about kind of link in.
Okay. And chokeholds, obviously with George Floyd, the knee on the neck, how that took place has made all chokeholds come under fire. And I clearly understand how the average citizen is watching TV and thinking, why in the world are police officers allowed to use a chokehold?
So both Eric Garner, George Floyd, they increased, hey, ban chokeholds, strangleholds. Again, context is everything, right? So it's been well documented that the NYPD, at that time, that was not a valid control hold that their department employed. The person who employed it in the Eric Garner incident had never been trained in it. They just did it. With George Floyd kneeling on the neck, that's not a chokehold or a control hold. That's just he chose to do this for that amount of time. So what our agency has, it's a vascular neck restraint. If I choke on food or I strangle people, I'm restricting air to their lungs. A vascular neck restraint restricts blood flow to the brain with the goal of a just quick rendering unconscious. While they're unconscious, we can underpower, handcuff them, secure them to prevent what's going on from continuing, and they're usually only out between 5 and 10 seconds. Language matters, first of all, context matters. So when agencies go, hey, we want to ban what NYPD had with the Eric Garner thing. Oh, okay, yeah, most agencies do. Mm-hmm. We want to ban what happened to George Floyd. Most agencies do. So for us, the vascular neck restraint, we try and educate our citizens on how it's vastly different. It is a different type of control hold, and the reason for it is not to impair someone's air. It's not to bring about pain compliance. It's to bring about compliance either from their submission, right? So if we call it encircling. If I encircle someone's neck and go, hey, you need to comply with our orders or else I'm going to render you unconscious. The vast majority, statistically speaking, of our applications, they give up then. People go, okay, I don't want that to happen. Great. Even if we've had to render, I think 3 or 4 people unconscious in the last 4 years, again, it's between 5 and 10 seconds. Our policy mandates medical aid right there. They usually wake up right off the bat, but they're secured in handcuffs for the safety of them, for the safety of us, for the safety of everybody else. It's an excellent control hold. You hear from agencies who have vascular neck restraint, Okay, if you take that away, did you want me to tase more people? Did you want me to baton more people? Did you want me, because that's where it's going to go. Because our other forms of de-escalation, either verbal de-escalation or physical control holds, aren't working. So I think it's a viable tool, it's a viable tactic. We've used it in, like I said, over the last 4 years, I want to say 26 times without any injuries, without anything. But I accredit that to instructors like yourself and how our department goes way above and beyond the average training for such a tactic or a technique. You have to be educated in it, you have to pass the practical portion of it, you have to pass a written exam, and our instructors who are certified won't let our officers do that unless they pass through that curriculum.
We follow the Gracie Survival Tactics curriculum, and they have just come out and said if you can't support the training, then you should not use that tool. So as a defensive tactic instructor, I've given scenarios where officers could utilize that tool, and the ones that have used it have solved the problem or de-escalated the situation, got compliance, put the person in handcuffs with much less struggle than the people who don't utilize it. So when my friends outside of law enforcement ask me about it, they're under the impression we want to keep the vascular neck restraint because we're police officers and that's our right to be able to use that. It's not about that. It's about we firmly believe it has the potential to de-escalate very out of control situations. And without that tool, we're starting to lose options.
I totally agree like you do. Don't let every agency do a vascular neck restraint unless they can commit to the training.
Number 2 on 8 can't wait, required de-escalation.
De-escalation is something that's taught in all of our training that have to do with force here at the Bellingham Police Department. We have the state mandated crisis intervention training, we have de-escalation training, we mentioned in firearms, we mentioned in defensive tactics, all our secondary weapon systems like our taser, our baton, it all talks about de-escalation. De-escalation is often misconstrued as verbal commands only. De-escalation also takes the form of coercive threats or physical actions. So we have in 2 of our policies, when we're talking about crisis intervention incidents, we talk to our officers in the policy about, hey, de-escalate every time you can. We use the theory of time, distance, and tactics.
And when you look at the stats, again, let's just say that our numbers are right. Over 99% of our calls are resolved without force. There's a lot of de-escalation happening every day.
Well, and also as a special operations lieutenant, we have a specially trained group of I think like 8 or 9, maybe 10 crisis negotiators that are assigned to SWAT, but any officer at any time can call them out. They even go above and beyond knowing all the further de-escalation skills to help safely resolve a situation, so we certainly utilize them as well.
Number 3, require a warning before shooting.
So federal and state law both state that when feasible, which means it's likely to work, officers are to give a warning before employing deadly force, before shooting. Our policy requires that as well for less lethal or non-lethal applications, and it's again part of that de-escalation. We are in compliance with federal and state laws, and sometimes you're not able to. The law recognizes that and understands you're working in a compressed time frame, and it's not an absolute thou shall every single time.
Number 4, require or exhaust all alternatives before shooting.
We touched on this a little. All alternatives before shooting is difficult in those compressed time frames. The first shooting I was involved in was a welfare check to where the person said, hey, you're going to have to come in and help this person. They basically made up that somebody was really hurt. So we opened the door and went in, and he started shooting at us. In a situation like that where you have a compressed time frame, I can't go, I'm going to verbally de-escalate. Then I'm going to try my pepper spray or a taser or a baton. Or
while you're getting shot.
Yeah, as Ferris Bueller once said, life moves pretty fast, right? So the Supreme Court in Graham v. Connor specifically stated that they understand that in tense, uncertain, and rapidly evolving incidents, stuff moves fast. Another thing that we found out, this dovetails in with the notion of a force continuum, is when those things were in play, and that was the models that was taught in the 80s and 90s, you actually found out that on average, you're using way more force per incident than you would normally. So instead of saying, hey, John, you're under arrest. No, I'm not. Okay. And you do something that would legally authorize me to use a taser and render you safe, and I handcuff you without further incident. But instead of going directly to that effective use of force, I have to go through this trial and error process to see what works. I'm going to verbally talk to you? No. Okay, well then I'm going to physically fight with you? No. Okay, then I'm going to baton you, or I'm going to pepper spray you. And going to what works the quickest is going to be the safest for everybody, at least injurious, certainly. And then also people forget exhausting all alternatives means different things for different people, because we have different skill levels, different body types, different strengths, different exertion levels, all that kind of stuff, which making it a requirement is just not realistic.
Number 5, duty to intercede.
Our use of force policy, in policy 300, I believe it's 300.2.1, we have a duty to intercede. And what that means, it's two-part. One, if I as an officer am seeing another officer doing something that is clearly excessive with respect to the use of force, I am mandated to stop that. Either by telling them stop, knocking them over, saying, hey, whatever, I am mandated to intercede in that. Part 2, which a lot of people just kind of gloss over because they're looking at part 1, is I also am to report that to a supervisor. So let's say I'm in a situation where I'm not in a position to directly intercede, but I see something or hear something or anything like that, I have to report that as well.
Number 6, ban shooting at moving vehicles.
Federal and state law does an excellent job on basically telling officers, unless it's this one particular 1 in a million circumstance, shooting in a moving vehicle is pointless. Recent court ruling also talks about self-created danger. So if I'm an officer and somebody's 50, 70 feet away from me in a car barreling towards me, I am, by law, supposed to move out of the way, thus negating that threat. Now, if I can't move, or I'm like, oh my gosh, and that's my only recourse, is I think this person's going to run me over, and I'm in fear for my life, and that's the only alternative presented, well, okay, there's that 1 in 1 million kind of time to do it. But because the laws are so restrictive, how we train at our agency and what our policy talks about is both the self-created danger and, hey, this probably isn't going to work anyways. We don't want to do an outright ban, because again, overly simplistic example, if that 1 in 1 million situation arises where one of our officers who's properly trained and properly educated and can effectively utilize deadly force to stop a threat, and the person happens to be in a car, we wouldn't want to ban that.
Number 7, we touched on this a bit already, but require the force continuum.
People can do a huge info dive on this. Continuums usually went away in like the 90s, certainly by the early 2000s. In the Graham v. Connor decision, Supreme Court in 1989, it even said, hey, police use of force, it's not capable of being precisely defined or mechanical application, which means like a chart. A continuum is a cognitive tool to oversimplify a situation for somebody else. If folks take the time to actually read this one, it talks about continuums, but what they're getting at, and they mention it in this section, they say they want specific direction on what force tools or options can be used in what circumstances. Our policy does that. You can only use taser in accordance with law in these circumstances, right? And federal law and state law dictate when I can use a baton, when I can use OC, when I can use a taser. I tell people, hey, for this section of 8 can't wait, we are in compliance, we just don't have a graphic tool because A, the court says you can't do it, and B, we don't want to confuse officers or the public as to, okay, this is the way it's going to go every time, because it doesn't.
Last on 8 can't wait, require comprehensive reporting.
Our reporting is mandated. Anybody who does anything that is more than compliance has to write a use of force report. That use of force report, everybody on scene writes one. The supervisor has to come investigate that, talk with the people, take photographs. Also, they need to write a report. They do that review report. That use of force incident and all those reports and all the body-worn camera footage is viewed by a lieutenant. Currently, that's my assignment. After I do that, I write a report and send that to the Deputy Chief of Operations. The Deputy Chief of Operations reviews everything, the body-worn camera footage, the videos, all that kind of stuff, all the reports, and then forwards it to the Chief of the Police. It's reviewed at so many multiple levels to ensure our people are doing the right things for the right reasons. They're doing it in accordance with law, with policy, and with the ethical considerations at hand. We are one of the few agencies, we publish all our use of force statistics every month. We want to be transparent with our community because A, we have nothing to hide, B, it is rare for our officers to use force. And when we do use force, again, it's usually, here, I'm going to put your hand behind your back. we want our community and our citizens to know that we're doing the right things for the right reasons, and part of the way we demonstrate that is by documenting. Again, a source of frustration for me is when I hear community members or I hear people say just things like, oh, yep, and that's when the body cameras get turned off. I'm like, no, we don't. If other agencies do that and you want to talk to those other agencies, fine. But as someone who has to audit the body-worn cameras, we have a lot of body-worn camera video. I mean, we have just a ton because most of our officers turn it on every single call they go to, and they're not required to, right? They're required to turn it on in certain circumstances, but the vast majority of our officers, and in a parent to be transparent and to protect themselves, have it on all the time. And we tell our citizens, this is why we have these cameras. It's great. And as a supervisor, if someone calls to complain, I want to complain about this officer for doing this, this, and this. I'm like, okay, well, our officers have body-worn cameras. I'll look at the video, describe what's happening, and they're like, what? Right? And I've had other people come in, hey, I want to make sure this was handled properly. Can I see the body-worn? Yeah, come on in. They look at the body-worn camera. They're like, excellent. That's all I want to know. We are part of this community. We want to show you what we do. I don't think any officer on this agency would be sad if the citizens got an in-depth understanding of what our job entails and how it does. Because I got to be honest, I think folks think we do things a lot differently. Like the vast majority of our calls are service-oriented. They have nothing to do with law enforcement. It is what it is, but people don't understand that. So again, we have to educate, which again, kind of closing the circle at the very start. It's hard to educate if A, people don't want to be educated, or B, it's hard to educate if we don't do a good job communicating. So everybody's in this together, so we need to have those conversations.